Right, so what we want to do is we want to set everything up. So let's just follow this project structure that we've created over here. So let's open our terminal, and then in our terminal, navigate to the folder that you want to have your file in. So in here, let's actually make a directory, and we're going to call this CSRF like that. And then we want to CD into CSRF like so. And now we want to open our VS Code. So you do code space dot like that. And then this will open our VS Code terminal. And then in here, let's just expand this and just zoom in a little bit. So what I want to do is I want to create two folders. So if you look at the structure again, in our CSRF, we have a back end and a front end. So front end, we'll probably use something to bootstrap it, like create React app. So we'll go with that one. I think that's what I used in this anyway. And then let's go ahead and create the backend folder. So this will be our Express app. And then also let's just open our terminal in here. And in this terminal now, what we want to do is create the app that we want. So you can see here it says make directory backend, and then we create our Express server. So actually we'll do that first of all. So we'll do our Express server. So npm init-y, what that does is it creates our package.json for us. So npm init-y, and this will create a backend package.json over here. What you need to do is move it into the backend folder actually, like that. So now if we open this folder, you can see a package.json in here. And then let's just actually cd into backend in our terminal. So we've changed the directory into our backend, and then we're going to paste in what we want to install. So we want to use Express for our Express app, CSRF, which is a package for CSRF that handles everything for us. We want cookie parser and cause. We need cause because we're going to be having an Express server and a React application as well. So they need to be able to communicate to each other. So let's install that now. And there's other packages other than CSRF, but for this example, it's quite a popular one that a lot of companies use. Recently, though, there has been any security vulnerabilities with this package because this package is now deprecated. So therefore, you should find an alternative. So if we go on npm in here, and then in npm, if we do CSRF like that, you'll see a few packages in here. You can use CSRF like this. There's quite a few, but let's just click on this one. And you can see here it's got still quite a lot of weekly downloads, but the last published was 5 years ago. So we want to either find an alternative, which there are, or we could just use this one if you're not so worried about security vulnerabilities in your application. It's more for more secure websites. You would need a package that has no security vulnerabilities. So that's something to bear in mind as well. But for this example, we'll use this. So all you need to do is npm CSRF and so on. But again, this is the docs. If you want to look at them, you can do. But what we want to do now, we've installed everything in here. We want to create a server.js file, or you can have an index.js file. And then essentially, let's copy everything across here, and then we'll explain what's going on. So back in here, we have now installed everything. We have a package lock, and we also have the node modules in the backend. So this is our Express app. Let's clear this. And then in here, what we want to do is we want to create this as a server. The min is here. We need to create a start command. So let me just delete this. So this is when we run npm start. And this command is going to be node server.js. You can install nodemon as well, which it listens to any changes you have made on your Express app, but we're just going to keep it as this. So what we will need to do is obviously close down our terminal and reopen. So that's fine. And then this is myself, Imran Codes. And then if you look down, we have dependencies, and these are the ones we installed. So you can see here Express, CSRF, which is 1.11.0, cause and cookie parser. So that is everything in here. We could put some description in. So a project to demonstrate CSRF protection. So that's essentially what it is. So let's save that. And then now we need to create in the backend folder, the server.js file, and then paste in the code that we copied earlier, and then we'll run through it. So at the top, we would import our packages that we have installed. So we have Express, Cookie Parser, CSRF cause, and we initialize our app. So it's, in our case, it's Express. We initialize that. We define a port because we need a port number of 5000. Then we set up the middleware. So in the middleware, I'll just space these out a little bit so it makes more sense. So the middleware is a step that happens before we run any sort of routes or any API routes or anything like that. This is an extra step that we would have to do if we didn't have the middleware set up. So middleware essentially does some transformations for us that we don't need to do all of the time later on in the application. So in this example, we're using cookie parser, which parses the cookie, and we could put a comment in here saying parse cookies, so you can read it when we upload the code. Again, this is a handy middleware, express.json, which parses our JSON request. So when we get JSON from the server, we want to also parse it, removing that extra step. And then also CORS, which is allow cross-origin requests for development. So basically working with React application as well. Then we have our CSRF protection. So this method here is coming from this CSRF package. And in here, we're passing in cookie true. So if we want to see further into the CSRF package, what we can do is command and click. And in here, this says this is a function and it takes in options. So you can see this is where we pass in what we need. So in our case, we are passing in the cookie, and this cookie value is either a cookie option, Boolean, or undefined. So in our case, this type, so with TypeScript, we have the types, we want to pass in cookie as true. We could also ignore methods and have a session key, but we'll leave it as simple as that for now. You can see here we have a namespace as well, which is in the request object of Express, adds the CSRF token as well, and that's going to be a string. This is not in the request object as per normal, but what we essentially do is we append that so it's there on our request object if we was using TypeScript. If you scroll down again, you can see here declare namespace CSRF and then extend some options in here. But this is how you would read external third-party packages. You can see here this is in our node modules types CSRF, and then in CSRF you have a load of options. That is what packages are. They're basically little modules that you can create and build, and then that therefore you serve it to whoever is using it. So if you want to know how to build this further, I have created a React component library that is basically a library that you publish to npm, then other people can use it. So that's another handy video to watch, so please watch that, and I'll link in the description as well. So that is essentially what this function is, the CSRF function. So let me close this down. So essentially we're giving the variable here, and then what we want to do then is serve the React build file. So again, we want to use app, which is the express up here at the top, express app.use express.static, and then this is where you have the path saying this is the path and you join it. So it's going to be front end slash build. We need to create our front end, so that's what we'll be looking at later on. Then what we do is we have an endpoint to get the CSRF token. So in our case, it's a get request. So it will be /API/CSRF token. We pass in the CSRF protection in here. So the get request is the endpoint. So if we hover over this actually, and I'll click into it, it takes in the path here, which we have at the top. Then we have any handlers. So that's our CSRF protection handler. And then we have a callback function. So what we want to do is close this down. We get the request and response. Again, if you're using TypeScript, you can see here, this is the request type. And then what the CSRF package does is it extends the type for us. So that's essentially what we looked at earlier. And then we have a response. So in our case, we make the API call, we get a response.json of CSRF token equal to request.csrf token, like that. And that is essentially how we set it. So that's how we would get our CSRF token from the front end. And we call this endpoint over here. Then we can have an example of a form submission endpoint as well. So this is API/submit form. We want the CSRF protection on here also to say that when we actually submit a form, we want to make sure this is protected. So therefore, we would then add the handler of the CSRF protection. And then that basically, if that is valid and everything works on that, then we can execute what comes after in the function, which is this callback over here. So request response, in the body of the request, we get the username, and we'll console log receive username from the username. Then again, we are able to submit the form successfully. So that's where we have two endpoints over here. Then we have a fallback to serve the React app for any other routes, which is store, which is essentially everything else. And we essentially send the file, which is the build index.html file there. So finally, we are listening to port 5000 in here, and that's just telling us that the server or the Express app is running. So that is the run through of the server.js. If we go back in our blog, that's step one complete. Now, what we want to do is do step two. So, what we can do, this is a typo, but essentially, npm create React app, and then this is going to be called front end. So, let's go back in our VS Code, and instead of getting out of this one, let's create a new terminal. And then this time we are going to do ls. So you can see we have a backend folder, but now what we want is a front end folder like that. And this is the React application. So this is going to create our React application now. And once that's done, we will be right back. Right, so now our Create React app has installed. All we need to do is cd to front end like that. And then let's do npm start. And essentially, this will start our React application. So what we need to do is open up localhost 3000. So we'll do that in here. So now you can see we have our Create React app over here. And then also we have the backend, but we are not running that at the minute. We just need to finish off our front end. So let's expand this. You can see here we have a node module and a source folder with our package JSON. So again, let's close this one down and open source. We want to do a bit of a cleanup so we can actually delete all of this stuff. But if we go in index.js, you can see here it renders our app. We append to document of root in here. In app.js, we have a lot of things going on, but what I want to do is just close this down like that. We don't need the logo as well. And this time what I'm just going to call this is the CSRF app. So now you can see we have a CSRF app in here. And if we go back into our blog, so in here, you can see now is scroll up. What we need to do, we cd into our front end, which we have done. We need to install Axios to make HTTP requests. So let's do that in our server. And then in app.js here, we'll import this code. And there's a lot going on in here, but I'll explain it as well. So let me just close our app down and install Axios like so. And also, whilst that's happening, let's just copy across everything to do with the front end, which is essentially the app.js or TS, wherever it is in here, app.js, and paste that in. So now what we want to do is we want to be able to see how the front end and the back end works. So in our case now, we have Axios installed and we are using hooks from React like this. And the version of React we're actually using is the latest, so 18. So that is the version. So essentially we have the app, which is a React component. So in here, there's a lot going down. We have a return block. We won't worry about that for now. So let's close that. And then we have 1, 2, and 3 functions in here. So what we want to do is explain them. So first of all, we want to have some piece of state that defines the initial state for the app. In our case, CSRF token is empty like that. And then we also have form data. So in our case, it's the username. So if you go back into server.js in here, we need the username in the body to be able to verify that they are able to submit the form. So therefore, this is why we need the username here. And also we need the CSRF token to get the endpoint to get the CSRF token. So let me just close this down as well. Back in app.js over here, we have defined our initial state in here, and then we need something to happen once our page loads or our component mounts. So let's say when I run into npm start, let's just do npm start for now. This is what should happen when this opens here. So this React app is injected into the browser, and then you can see now we have a form. Our username is empty, like you can see there. And what we want to do is run something in the use effect. So this is the fetch CSRF token. But what will happen is, because we're not running anything here, it will fail. So we should see this error in the logs. So if we open our console and open this, and in console over here, expand here, you can see it says error fetching CSRF token Axios error. That is the error that we get from Axios saying 404, which is not found. Again, we do that again, and you're seeing it twice because we're using React strict mode, so it will render once and then render again. So if we go into our React application in index.js, you can see here we have strict mode on like that. It generally just is for development purposes. Or if we save that, and actually we don't need that. So let's save it. And what happens this time, it only runs once, you can see like that, but we need strict mode on because we're in development. So let's just go back in here and save that again. And then you'll get your two logs as per usual over here. This makes sense because what you're doing is you're fetching to get the CSRF token from our Express server, but what's happening is we're not running it. So this server, we're not able to connect to this because we haven't got it run on here. And to run it again, you go into package.json, and it's this one npm start for node server.js, which starts this server, and then when it is running, you'll get this console log saying server running on port 5000 in our case, or whatever the port is that you defined. So again, let's go back into our app.js on the client and see how we would fetch the CSRF token. So when we fetch with APIs, what generally happens is that is an asynchronous request. So we need to wait for that to resolve, which is a promise. So we get a resolve reject value in there. So this is why we do the try catch. And you can also have a finally, but we don't need it in this case. So in our try, what we are doing is we are awaiting axios.get slash API slash CSRF token. So let's just copy this and go into server and command FMV. And this one here is the endpoint to get the CSRF token. The middleware runs here. If everything is valid and fine, then we send the JSON response back to the client. So in our case, in the request object, in our case, the CSRF token will be the request.csrf token like that. So that's how it would work. And then what we do is we set the CSRF token to response.data.csrf token. So basically, this piece of state will update. So at the top, we have this available to us to be used. So again, there's a lot of use of the word CSRF, but again, that's the best way to describe it. So what we do is we get our response in the data. We have access to this, which is coming from the request.body CSRF over here, which is request.body.csrf token, this one down here. So that is what we're doing in the try block. If everything is fine, that's great and amazing. So what I also can do to double check this is we can do this over here, or just to see it's being set, or we could just log it as well in. We could log this piece of state in here. So again, we're declaring this and then we are invoking it. Now what you can do as well is all of these functions could be set separate in a helper file. That way your app.js won't get too cluttered. But in our case, we can just minimize that now because we've covered it. And again, this will only happen once on mount. So when we have these array brackets over here, that just basically means rerun this either at the start, or you can pass in the value whenever certain value changes, then run it again. But in our case, we just want it on component mount, saying that when we start the application, we need to fetch the CSRF token. So that's the first one. Then we have a handle form input change, which is essentially updating the form data value. So in our case, it's just getting the username and updating that in our form over here. And then again, we want to handle the form submission. So in our form submission, what we would do is we get the E, which is the event object. So let's go back down in here. So in our return block, we have this form. We have the H2, the form on submit. So in here we have our value and on change, which is going to handle the change for us. And then when we submit, handle submit is called. Again, we need to update the value whenever we type in. So in our case, because we are using use state, then each type we do, it re-renders this app.js file. So bear that in mind when you're working with the use state on forms, or you could use uref as well, but that's up to you. And then if we handle change, so let's go back into the handle change function, we're passing in the event object, and then in here, we prevent the default behavior, which means we don't want to refresh all the time. So once we've done that, we have a try catch block again, and this is a asynchronous function because again we're using Axios to do a post request this time and not a get request. So again, if we search this endpoint in our server, we're not getting the CSRF token now. We are going to be posting the form in here like that. And this is an extra validation to say that actually this person is on our site and they are who they say they are. So therefore, we can then log the username and also return the response.json as the form is submitted successfully. So that is fine. So let's go back in app.js. But what we do is in the post method, so in axios.post, you can see here it's basically got the URL, we have the data, and we have some extra config. So let's close this down. We have the URL, we have the data, and any extra config in here. So what we want to do in our headers is we want to add the x-csrf token as the updated token that we have updated once we open our application. So when we open the application and the backend server is running, in here, our CSRF token will be logged. So that is fine. If it's an error like this, then what will happen is this handle submit won't work, and then therefore it will error out and go into the catch block where we then get this, which is error submitting form and error. So let's actually show you how that would work. So this is running, and let me just type in Imran code in here. And when I press submit, what will happen is I'll clear my console. When I press submit, you should see the console error that we have in our catch block over here because we are not able to make this API request because our backend server isn't running. So again, let's press submit, and you can see here error submitting form, and then we get the Axios error as well. So this is a good sign because again, we want to make sure our site is secure and we want to prevent cross-site request forgeries. So far so good. And then in here, when we make our Axios call, this CSRF token is what we need to send to the server, and we need to validate that in our CSRF protection middleware in here. So the middleware, again, if you go up, CSRF in here, which is the package, this is what essentially validates everything for us. So again, this is handy for us, or we can create our own middleware, which we will do later as well. So now, if we go back into our blog, you can see we've done this part over here, and now we need to build the React application. So essentially, with the build folder, we need to kind of deploy that and then host that on a URL somewhere and then run the application. So we're not going to do that. I'm just going to show you a quicker, easier way to test that this works. So instead of using the front end build folder, what we'll do is instead of that, it'll be /source and then /index.js. So that's where we are running our application. So this way we will be able to do npm start and then test our application. And then the same here, front end source /index.js like that. So now let me save this. And then what we need to do is do npm start, and we have our backend running as well like that. And if you see in the token state over here, we actually get the CSRF token, which is this one over here. So that's handy. And now that basically is run in the use effect. So in our app, so app.js over here, you can see at the top, we are logging the CSRF token, and we are also logging the CSRF token state like that. So that is coming from the backend. So again, we make the API request. So it's localhost 5001 /API /CSRF token, which is again this endpoint over here. We do the CSRF protection middleware in here, and then this returns the CSRF token from the request object in here. So that is that one set.